Hi, I'm Julie Callie, CMO at JobSync. Thank you for joining us today. Our topic is the UK Employment Rights Act of 2025, the unintended consequences, and how to navigate. Today's event will be recorded and shared with those who have registered and also posted on the JobSync's YouTube channel. We are a cameras on roundtable, so please turn on your cameras to be part of the conversation. But if you're not speaking, please turn your mic off so that everyone can enjoy the roundtable conversation without the distractions. We like to say that there are two conversations that happen in these events, one on camera and one in the chat. Please join us in the chat as well. We may pull some of the questions or comments from that into the broader conversation. So if you don't feel comfortable taking off mic, that's a great place to go to participate as well. But joining me from the JobSync team today, we have Leah Daniels, Alex Murphy, who just happened to be in London for today's live event. But now I'd love to introduce our moderator and today's discussion coordinator for this, and that's the head of international markets, Colin Minto.
Thank you very much, Julie, and welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone who's watching. I'm joined on a subject that is really close to my heart by some incredible people who will introduce themselves in a short while. That's Nighat Sahi, an employment lawyer from RSW Law. We've got Martyn Wright and Joanna Hackett, who are global TA leaders. And we're going to have a wonderful conversation about this. And as I said, it's very close to my heart because I see this as opportunity. This is opportunity for us as TA leaders and TA teams to own this conversation and own this in terms of our organisations we support. So I just want to introduce or have people introduce themselves quickly, and then we'll get into the conversation. I know we've got a question that's already come in, or some questions that already come in, which we'll get to as well. But first of all, I'd like to introduce everyone to Nighat Sahi. Nighat, would you mind just introducing yourself, please?
Yes, absolutely. I'm Nighat. I'm from RSW Law, one of the partners, and I've been doing employment law for my sins for over 20 years.
Thank you so much, Nighat. And over to you, Joanna.
I'm Joanna Hackett. I'm Group Lead for Talent Acquisition Excellence at Howden Group, which is an insurance company.
Fantastic. And Martyn.
Thanks, Colin. Yeah, nice to meet you, everyone. My name's Martyn. I've been in TA for more years than I want to mention right now, and looking very much forward to this conversation, but also how it impacts on the wider globe as well.
Fantastic. So thank you, everyone, and really appreciate you joining us. So let's get into it, because this is a seismic piece of legislation that is in and phasing in over the next couple of years. So we obviously have to start with the what is it and what's changed. So Nighat, if I can turn to you and you can just take us through what's happening and what that potential implications might be.
Yeah, of course. So obviously the UK employment landscape is going to undergo a period of significant reform. Some of it's already began. Some people may not realise that actually one of the things that changed actually happened in October 2020, December 2025. So the Employment Rights Act 2025 introduces a wide-ranging number of changes that will reshape how organisations attract, assess, and even retain talent. I'm just going to touch on a few because there's actually a number, but I think these are the ones that are most significant for TAs. So the first one that actually is, I think, quite important is that from day one, these are things that have already occurred, that there was a implementation of SSP changes from 2026. Some people may not think it's so significant. There were Parental Right Act changes that came in on the 6th of April 2026. And there was also the Fair Working Agency, which every employer needs to be aware of, which has significant power. That came into place in 2026. And there's collective redundancy changes that are also coming on the 6th of April 2026. There's the sexual harassment changes, which again, employers need to be aware of. But one of the couple of things that are coming in and is important for TAs is that tribunal time limits are going to be changing. So that's significant in terms of recruitment. You want to make sure you get the right person in. The qualifying period for an employee to effect any litigation is changing, a dramatic change from 2 years to 6 months. And then the removal of statutory cap. Those two changes are taking place actually in January 2027. And then there is, which is quite a point again, is the fire and rehire practices where those types of dismissals will become automatically unfair except in limited circumstances. That takes place in January 2027. One that probably is causing some contention for TAs will be the introduction of guaranteed hours and additional protection rights for our 0-hour workers. That date is to be confirmed, but it is projected that changes will take effect in 2027.
Wow.
So that's just a quick run through of some of the changes that are taking place.
Wow, that's unbelievable. I said the word seismic, right? And you've just probably spoken to about 8 things that we should all be really, really drilling into. So on that basis, we've got 2 people that are living and breathing this, and that will be obviously celebrating this to the employees that are coming into the organisation, but looking out for those challenges and risks that are associated with it. And this is where I think we look at opportunity as well, because TA is the genesis point for people coming into the business. So I think it's right and proper that we take the lead on this. So let's turn to Joanna. Based on what Nighat has just said, there's going to be some things in there that are top of your radar. What's going through your mind right now, and what are you thinking of, and what are you potentially doing?
Well, I think there were a couple of key things. One is around sort of contracts, and one is around the 0 hours element. Obviously, there's been more recent guidance published that actually workers may be able to opt out of this day one rights on 0 hours. So actually, this might help, because while some workers very much want that flexibility, want those fixed contracts, there are a lot of employees, be it because they worked in some kind of creative field, but they work on projects, they might be fitting those 0 hours around their studies or caregiving responsibilities and things like that. My own personal experience of going to university, I needed that 0 hours contract to be able to fund my studies. And actually taking that flexibility away from employees could be very problematic and was a real concern. But Nighat, I think you mentioned that there was a change around that. I don't know if you wanted to share a bit more, because I've definitely spoken to a number of people that have highlighted that as a concern.
Yes, in actual fact, there's a package allegedly coming out and being rolled out in 2027. So one of those actually is the mechanism for actually moving from a 0 hour to guaranteed hours, is that an employer must look at a likely period, they haven't decided yet, which will be a 12-week period, in order to your employer then to offer you a contract that reflects those. However, the choice point here is that the worker actually gets a choice. They can actually move to those guaranteed hours and move on to a guaranteed worker contract, or if they actually prefer, if there's someone who's doing 4 hours a week and that's what they want to carry on doing, they can actually opt out and stay on a 0 hour contract and remain confined within that contractual framework rather than moving on to the guaranteed hours. So that's actually probably a really good point for most employers, where I think, especially from what I'm getting from you, Joanne, is that was a real concern and a real blow, where those individuals will need that flexibility. So I think that's a good move by the government, and actually making it a little bit more amenable to those who wanted to have those guaranteed rights and a day one right from dismissal for those individuals who want to remain on the 0 hour contracts.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's definitely a very positive change. And I think it's making sure that I think the government communicates that, because I think for a long time it's been coming, and a lot of companies have absolutely heard that 0 hours is not going to be an option anymore. So I know a lot have started planning for how they mitigate that. Often that has been by moving those roles potentially elsewhere. But for seasonal working, things like that, that could be problematic and could continue to be an issue for companies where they may not want to offer those fixed hours. If it is a sort of responding to spikes that they're facing, they may not be able to finance giving someone fixed guaranteed hours over long term. So I think there's a balance of protecting the workers, but also protecting the business to enable them continue to operate in this country in an effective way, because we're not the only place where one can hire people.
Absolutely. And I think you've hit the nail on the head there. Yeah, these things are coming. something, and Nighat, you said there's potentially going to be packages. So this is a bit of a moving target. It's phasing over a couple of years, right? Hopefully, there's still an opportunity for us to get our thoughts across on how this might impact in conversations with government. So, talking about impact, Martyn, over to you. You heard what's changing, and you're obviously in the firing line yourself with regards to what you do. What's this? What does this mean to you? What's going on in your world?
Yeah, absolutely. So speaking to a number of contacts, both in TA, HR, procurement, there are sort of two schools of thought. One is this is coming. We aren't exactly clear on every single facet of the law, what's going to happen, but this is coming. So we need to get on board now and work out what our strategy as an organization is. So as Joanna rightly said, you know, these are being brought in to protect the employees, but for employers, there are, you know, many other considerations. And so I think, you know, getting that sorted now and looking at things in probably more depth than organizations have in terms of workforce planning, which has always been an area where many organizations have been just frankly awful, and having that workforce plan, but with a secondary thought of what's coming in, but then also having things like probationary periods mapped out, it will lead to more hiring decisions. Now, you can argue that it will be, each hiring decision will be more scrutinized, but that isn't necessarily a bad thing. Mm-hmm. So, you know, if you're hiring the right people in the right slots, that's good. But there will be sort of more pressure on TA to make sure that we, alongside hiring managers, get that right. So I think, you know, there will be changes across the whole landscape for TA, HR, procurement. Most of them positive, but it will make some organizations, and I said there's two sides. The other side is, let's see what happens when things come in, which to me is not the right option. It's too important to sort of push away for when things are in place.
Yeah. So look, let's lean in on that. Nighat, people waiting to the last minute, people waiting to see what happens. There's consequences, right? There's risks associated with this for getting this wrong. So looking at it through that lens, what could be the implications on organizations for getting this wrong and not going into this, you know, with some preparatory activities?
I think the risks are actually beginning at the beginning of employment rather than, you know, once your employee's on board. The process now becomes in recruitment. So really what I would generally be saying to employers and TAs is that you want to start looking at your job adverts, your candidate communications are so important, your selection processes and the onboarding, they all carried now increased scrutiny. What you don't want is purely drafted role descriptions, inconsistent interview processes, those things that are unclear that will end up resulting in potential litigation. So for example, if you have a defective role description or an interview process that is not as clear and transparent as it should be, what you will end up having is you may get a candidate through the door that you think, you know, fits the mold, but you've done it in a quick decision. The consequences will be that that person will be onboarded and potentially within a matter of days, months, you realize that actually you've got the wrong person on board. What will be the risk to the business then? Potentially a claim, a grievance, all those issues with a line manager. That will actually just increase management time and risks, potentially ultimately leading to some sort of claim being made against the employer. And now because you have day one rights and also a decreased unfair dismissal claim, which you can make within 6 months, and also with the whistleblowing protection, sexual harassment, all those sort of things, if you're not getting those processes right at the beginning correct, or even you do a strategic review across the board of them, you could end up having people come through that you would not have ordinarily picked or selected. So I think those selection procedures right at the beginning are what TAs need to start looking at to reduce that reputational risk, the legal exposure.
Thank you, Nighat. And this plays back to my point about we're the genesis point. We're at the front end of all this as a
Hmm.
TA profession. So we've got to get it right. I think we'd all argue that we do get it right to the best of our abilities, but this is surely an opportunity for us to be that guide for the organization, to put in place training programs, have the conversations, bring that to the C-suite, and position ourselves, because it's a tough profession, TA, at the moment. Yeah, this is a huge piece of opportunity, but also risk associated with it. It's an opportunity for us to rise. So going back to Joanna and Martyn, what do you feel about that? And what are you kind of thinking through with regards to responding to those potential implications, but seizing on the opportunity?
Well, I think it's this is a really key point that that's brought up around that day one rights. I think with the rise of AI and candidates using AI agents to match their CV to a job description, they apply, they look perfect. Your normal screening tools can't filter them out. Suddenly every CV can look like the perfect fit for a job description. You can have candidates, we're all speaking on Zoom now, we are on a computer, I have a second screen here. If this was an interview, I could have an AI chat agent going there answering every question for me and telling me exactly what to say in the interview process. So candidates, and we have seen it, I've seen examples of it, have got through interview processes, have matched their CV to job description, have AI answer all the interview questions, they've got in, they've got through the door. They've got day one rights, and actually, it turns out this candidate hasn't necessarily been entirely transparent with their experience, hasn't necessarily presented their true skills. But as an employer, you're then in an incredibly difficult situation as to what you do. And the TA function, I don't think there is an answer to it quite yet, apart from bringing every single candidate into a face-to-face interview, especially in volume hiring. That's not always practical. The reality of actually face-to-face interviewing absolutely every single person face-to-face for the job and making sure there's not an AI agent answering the questions for them is very difficult. So what do you do as a TA function as hiring managers? You're between a rock and a hard place because you might be missing out on some really good people, and you might be getting in the wrong people that haven't necessarily approached things in the right way. But then you're stuck and you're potentially facing very expensive claims, especially with the increase of what those costs are with the changes in its legislation. So I think it's a very, I'm not sure anyone has an answer to this quite yet. And I think TA can't necessarily fully protect against it because it comes down to resources of both the TA teams and the businesses for all of that. So I think we're in a difficult place. They have solved some very key things for employees and for people that are doing things the right way and being discriminated against. But there's also a second unintended consequence of created for the businesses and for actually a situation where business can't thrive as well. And they might be more cautious and they might actually look at other lower legislated regions where it might be more straightforward to combat the AI issues we're facing at the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%. And yeah, Martyn, jump in.
Yeah, sorry, Colin. Yeah, no, I was just saying because we were obviously discussing before this forum that if you get it right as an organization, it can make organizations more attractive. So there's an element that if you use this in the right way, with probably your organizational design specialists, it could actually make a better culture, and it can make those rights a positive. It can make it an more attractive place to work, and therefore more attractive to attract people. So I think that there is a balance, and it will depend on how an organisation actually grasps this and takes it on board. But I totally take Joanna's. If you don't, then potentially the UK could be less attractive. There are many, many other countries where people can be based with lower levels of legislation. You see people squeezing businesses, squeezing margins. So any material perceived negative could make people look elsewhere. But I think that this is where you get the balancing act, and if you do it the right way, it's positive. You do it the wrong way, it's negative.
Yeah, no, it's a great shout. You talked about squeezing budgets, etc. Does this give TA more importance at the front end of the process? Because I'd said we're the genesis point of people coming into the business, but we're also the first line of defense, right? So is more going to hang on the decision made by TA? We're not the only people in the process, right? We're not the only ones that need to get this right. We've got everyone else that's involved in the process. We've got hiring managers, etc. So yeah, what are your thoughts on that, Nighat? What are your thoughts around that?
I mean, I don't envy you guys. You're actually at the coal face. I mean, one of the things I was thinking about, being strategic about it all, because I think that's one of the things that
Yeah.
TA leaders need to do is, I mean, one of the things I suppose I can impart in terms of, my knowledge and what I foresee. I've been reflecting on it quite a lot, and I thought one of the things that TAs could do, other than obviously having a rigorous selection process, and I know that's very easy for me to say, and in terms of actually getting it right, because I think Joanna hit on a spectacular point when she said about the AI. You don't think about those tools now available. If you're doing an online interview, I could sit here and bash away all sorts of stuff. So I think the scrutiny would be probably best placed on evidence-based assessments. And that again is extremely difficult, time consuming, but it's one of the things that maybe TAs can look at. One of the other things I was thinking about in terms of elevated the elevating importance of actually trying to get someone right in place in the employers and businesses, making the probationary periods. That's one of the things we haven't, I think someone, maybe Martyn or Joanna,
Yeah.
talked about very, very briefly on probationary periods. But probationary periods will probably have huge significance for TA leaders now. And what they do with HR in terms of actually, and the hiring managers, to ensure a number of things that could happen. Firstly, I think during those probationary periods, you've taken on your employee, they were fantastic at interview, they're going to be a great fit. So what you want to do then is make sure that right from the outset, they have clear expectations. They know what they're doing. You have really good, well drafted job descriptions. I mean, I've seen it all, but I think one of the most important documents that employers actually consistently fail to do is have a good job description. It's not a legal document. It actually is an employer's document that sets out everything, all the expectations. We have these great things that we sent out when we're recruiting somebody, essential, desirable. Then I think it falls flat when it comes to actually doing on the job. So I think that will be fundamentally a really important document for the whole of HR to actually look at, making sure that they get that right. The other thing is that performance during that probationary period is assessed consistently and fairly. And again, you need the right supporting documents around that, your selection criteria, how you're going to assess that individual. Make sure it's free from bias, make sure it's not discriminatory, because you are going to get employees that come through the door. And these are classic situations where disability, you have your invisible disabilities, you have your obvious physical seeing disabilities. And it's those invisible disabilities that will completely flummox a hiring manager, a TA, because you're not going to see them. You don't know if somebody has a mental health condition. They perform excellently at the interview, but when it comes to actually doing the work, they may need flexibility, may need reasonable adjustments. So performance therefore becomes very important, and getting those early conversations get really important. And also, I think the third thing I would say in terms of managers are actually equipped to make those timely and well documented, and I'm going to emphasize that, well documented decisions, because again, one of the things I see when it comes to employers having to face a litigation is documents, lack thereof. It's a huge problem. So there would be my little takeaways, I think.
Yeah, yeah. I mean that's really interesting because if we look at the end-to-end recruitment process, there's multi potential points of failure. Well, you zoomed in on the job description, but from the job description, we normally put the advert out, and in the advert, we can sometimes oversell, we can sometimes oversell, we can sometimes get them wrong. So there's all these different points that I think we have the opportunity to correct, to govern, to put processes in, not necessarily police, but make sure that we're out on the front foot in the right way. So just responding to what Nighat said there, there's so many areas. I'm going to just jump back to you, Joanna. What are you thinking after of those points you made?
No, I think those are all really, really good points. And I think those are all really important things for organizations to do. And I think when you're a large corporate, you have a well set up HR team, you have a well set up legal and so on teams and set up recruitment team. it's still not easy. It's still hard. And even for an organization of our size, it's still difficult. But I'm thinking more about the smaller businesses that don't have their own HR team, they don't have a big recruitment team. These are people that have built their business from the ground. It might be a team of 10, 12 people. They're all fundamentally just doing the do that needs doing. How do those businesses protect themselves? Because those people are no different to really those employees. They are working day and night. They might not be taking holidays for years on end because they're trying to build up their own business. They don't necessarily have the capacity, the knowledge, the time to even attend things like this to hear about those things. How are we protecting those people who have worked really hard to build something up for themselves? What are we doing to protect them? And all this legislation, there are a lot of candidates that might have a lot of time to get really clued up on this and then, take that business to court, drag them through litigation, which they just simply can't afford. It might be a really small sort of mom and pop type business. I'm used to working in a lot with US businesses like that. But in the UK, we have those. And how are those being protected? Where are the protections for those people? Because they don't necessarily have the time to be diving into all of those things, keeping records of absolutely everything. So it's a difficult one because it's very easy to look at those large corporations we read about in the news that might not be paying their taxes in the right way or doing some potentially naughty things. But what about the smaller businesses? How are we protecting those and those people in those businesses that are running them?
I agree wholeheartedly. And Martin, something that just jumped into my
Mm.
mind is TA professional capability. We've got a duty, obviously, to be the gatekeeper at the front end, but to also educate the other people in the chain, the hiring managers. Yeah,
Mm.
we're equipping ourselves at the front end here about all these changes, but who's educating everyone downstream? And is that something you're looking at with regards to your teams? You run big teams of recruiters and TA professionals about equipping them, but also equipping others in the organisation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, one is equipping your team, your recruiters. That's that goes without saying. But I think there is a responsibility, um, potentially working with L&D, to drive that through to the hiring managers who
Mm.
may well not be aware of these regulations, particularly Joanna, picking up on your point in a sort of SME business. They may not be fully aware of what the implications are for their organization. And I think, sorry, just picking up on one point from Nighat as well, the probationary period. I'm sure we've all been in organization, I know I have, where you've realized that 6 months have passed and you go to your boss and say, oh, by the way, have I passed my probation? I went, yeah, you have. Otherwise you wouldn't be here. You go, okay, that's fine. There's no real check-in. There's no real catch-up. There's no real, am I doing a good job or am I not? Are there any areas that you wish me to focus in on? So I think there's almost we all know job descriptions, some of them, some good, some bad. Then we see job postings, which are derived from that, but you hope will sell the role. I think there almost needs to be a third document of expectations when you're in the role, which is different from the first two. It's about what as my employee, I expect you to achieve in your first 6 months, 12 months, whatever the probationary period is. And Nighat said that there's an element of then managing that expectations of the individual. But, God forbid, that person isn't performing the way that they should be, then you could go back to that document and point out, these are the expectations that we both had for your role. And here are some areas that I think you can improve on. And so it's much more fair, clean, and it also can help in those horrible situations which no one likes, where that person isn't actually right for the role. But you set those parameters. You'll meet. You will have a meeting after 2 weeks, a month, 2 months, 3 months, whatever it may be, to set those and make sure that that person is either on track or they are aware that they're not.
Yeah, no, thank you, Martin. And Nighat, I'm just going to turn to you because we had a conversation about this because when I was reading through everything. I've been serializing this in some articles. The one that kind of spooked me is just how wide the investigation can now go, or potentially go, certainly in the harassment space, to pre-hire. Looking at the supply chain, looking at the process of bringing people into the business. So you mentioned it as well, that that's an area that's being tightened. So could you expand on that?
Is that the whistleblowing?
Whistleblowing, I think, was sexual harassment as well, wasn't there?
Yes,
With
they come
regards
in
to,
together.
yeah,
Yeah. So what's actually happened is that in terms of obviously sexual harassment per se, there's now a zero tolerance, and a lot of the things actually that's kicked this all off is actually from the financial sector, because obviously there's been a lot of bad behaviour. So what they've done there in the FCA regulated world is really make that conduct now top line in terms of regulatory issues. So what the government has decided to do with that as well then is to filter that down and make sexual harassment, even though it's protected as a protected under the Equality Act, they've given it an underlying secondary element. Whereas if someone raises that in their grievance, and this is something for all HR managers, they need to be alerted to this. So it's sort of irrelevant on being a day one right. It comes across the board for all HR managers that sexual harassment is now additionally protected under whistleblowing. Previously, grievances could fall within the whistleblowing arena, but it was very technical and very difficult to actually say that a general grievance would be a whistleblowing. But if now someone actually says that they've been harassed, um, automatically that grievance should be treated as a whistleblowing element and disclosure as well. And therefore, you get automatic protection there. And that also, sexual harassment is opened up to third parties. I think that's what we were talking about. So
yeah,
your supplier, someone who's dropping off a parcel, says a comment or does something which it amounts to sexual harassment to your worker who's on the desk picking up the package or whatever this situation arises, you are now liable for that conduct and that particular element. Your employee can sue you for the harm that they suffer. So again, I mean, it's something, it's not, like I said, it's not particular to TAs, it's actually right across the board, right across the business.
yeah.
And what actually HR directors and managers should be doing in their business is certainly doing some additional training around whistleblowing and sexual harassment and what that actually means in the wider context. Just so everybody's aware, whistleblowing and protections have an unlimited cap when it comes to compensation. So for a small business, as Joanna's been highlighting in this conversation, where you have less resources, that could be devastating. That could end your business. Because if you're looking at compensation, you're looking at awards for health, injury to health, the discrimination award, which is called injury to feelings. Those actual categories are actually quite substantial. Even an award of £10,000 is significant,
Yeah.
but you can get awards much higher, much, much higher. And there is literally, from especially the messages from the government, and I wanted to bring the Financial Conduct Authority in. I think Joanna mentioned she's in a insurance-backed business, which will be FCA regulated, no doubt. In that area, the tolerance of sexual harassment and misconduct in that area is zero. So that has major implications, and that's now being filtered through with the additional protection in whistleblowing. I hope that answers your question.
No, it does. Again, it just broadens the scope of the responsibility I think we have as TA leaders to equip ourselves and understand this, have those conversations internally, work with the C-suite. But again, I'm just going to say we're at the sharp end, the front end of bringing people into the organization. Yeah, and I think we have that opportunity to lead on this. And let's, you mentioned right at the beginning, there's an opportunity for employees here. Yeah, the government were doing this for a reason, right? For all the right reasons. Yes, we're talking about some unintended consequences, but let's think about the benefits. Well, what can we be doing? Look at Joanna and Martyn again. What can we be doing as organisations to leverage these changes to give ourselves an advantage over talent competitors by understanding this and using this in terms of how we attract? Joanna.
I think from my perspective, I think I would look at it from a contractor perspective. I think that's an important space. Often contractors and projects can be hired, they get given an initial 6-month contract, it keeps rolling, but they don't have that certainty. And they might be waiting until the day before that renewal date to see, am I being extended? Will I be able to pay my mortgage? Where is this going? So actually, it could drive businesses to look at this much more clearly in terms of, I think this project is going to take me 18 months. So actually, I'm going to offer them maybe a fixed term contract because
Yeah.
day rate contracts are inevitably more expensive because you pay for that uncertainty. So they might be giving them a fixed term contract. So suddenly they get private medical, they get the benefits, and they get a certainty of, I have 12, 18 months, however long it may be, in this contract. And there is certainty. And obviously, from an employer's perspective, if they're terminating at the point of that initial contract end date, there is very limited risk. So employers are protected. But for employees, they can fully plan for what they're doing next and how long they have certainty for and start to look for something new when they're nearing the right point in their contract. So I think there's a balance and there are ways in which this could be very beneficial. Obviously, not every project runs to time, and then businesses can find themselves in very difficult situations if they're then having to extend and suddenly with day one rights extensions. And I'm sure Nighat can talk to this a bit more. We run into some very murky waters, but certainly from a benefit perspective, it can allow contractors to have a little bit more visibility over certainty and length of their contract and not, you know which way things are going.
Yeah. Yeah, and we can lead on that with how we're expressing that out in our marketing. And to Martyn, we were sort of mulling this over about the impact on employer branding, EVP. We're always searching for those things to hook people in to want to choose us. I'm going to use the inevitable employer of choice, but we did bring AI in, which is bound to come into a conversation. But employee choice is something we always used to cover. Giving people the confidence to come to your organization because you get it. Yeah, and they're going to come into an environment where the behaviors, the treatments, the conditions are right. This is again an opportunity for us, I would suggest.
Absolutely, absolutely it is. I think what we've caveated, all of us have, if it's done in the right way. If
Yeah,
it's done in the right way, it's a real positive, and an organisation can, look at itself and look at its employees and be quite proud. I think there is a lot to still work through, as Nighat rightly said. There are still stages coming in. We've still got to work through what some of the implications will be and potentially, as you said, Colin, influence some of those outcomes.
yeah,
But I think that as a recruiter and always looking at a glass half full, I think there are positive implications of this. But there are some serious considerations, shall we say, that need to be put into place. So I think, supporting a business to do that can really give a positive outcome
yeah,
and make it more attractive and help with, exactly as you said, the EVP, the employer brand. We are a place you want to work. We look after our employees. Now, there are many organizations that say that, and there are some organizations that live and breathe that, and there are some where it's just blatantly not true, and it's a marketing campaign saying we are really good at the front end, but behind the scenes we're not really. So I think almost having that transparency
yeah.
will probably make organizations think twice.
Yeah, yeah, and I've got to now look at another component of the end-to-end process. Let's talk management consultancy speak and look at target operating model. How do we recruit? Are we always in-house? Are we agency? Are we RPO? So, you went down the line there a little bit, Martyn, to say that some companies might not necessarily operate as well as others in certain space. Some businesses might look at this as a risk too far, and they might think, let's outsource the risk. Yeah. Is this going to have an impact? I'll come back to you, Martyn, because I know that you've got straight away because you've got a deep experience in RPO. Do you think this might have an impact on organisations wanting to go down that route and outsource more of their workforce to third parties because of the changes, because of the potential risks that might be involved?
Simply put, yes. I think the organisation, not just RPOs, but organisations that work as third parties, employing contractors in whichever country, they are specialists in this. This is what they do. This is their bread and butter, and so any commercial model has baked into it anything that doesn't go exactly as planned, shall we say. That is there, and these people are experts. And I am seeing in a number of contacts that I'm speaking to, kind of almost, as you rightly said, mitigating the risk to a third party to say, I'm not sure we're going to get this right. And it takes quite a mature organisation and/or person to say that. I'm worried we're going to get this wrong. I'd like you to have the risk, for which we'll pay you for your services. But we know that you are used to doing this. We maybe aren't. So I think, there will definitely be that. And it can help offset, outsource some of the risk that some organizations will perceive as coming their way. And, when we say risk, we're often talking, in Nighat Sahi, litigation, finances, costs. So if you put that on another organization, then that can negate those.
No, absolutely, and we've just gone down that route, and I've opened up not a can of worms, but a conversation line where I don't know. So over to you, Nighat. Can you offset that risk? Is there still responsibility on the employer with regards to the supply chain that they utilize with regards to all these changes or some of these changes? Is it as simple as Martyn said, this is a bit risky for me, we don't understand it, let's outsource? Or is this legislation going to still hold the employer accountable for more than maybe it is now?
Well, look, this Employment Rights Act is for those employees based in the UK. So if you're outsourcing the work, then those Employment Rights Act won't take effect. So if you're choosing to, employ people from Singapore, obviously that jurisdiction will apply. So it is an unintended consequence, I think, that the government hadn't foreseen, that clearly making these changes may impact on a wider scale the choices that employers want to do in terms of, shall we employ XYZ here? Because of the restrictions and all the framework that we've got to now grapple with, it may be easier that we go to the Philippines or wherever it is to actually get that resource. But I think for me, what I would try to impart to all the TAs online here, and that what we want to look at really is that we want to retain those employees and businesses here in the UK. So don't be afraid of maybe getting early advice. I'm not touting for work. I'm just saying that it's literally sometimes it's getting that secondary opinion. I don't think that we should view, and I'm a very pragmatic lawyer, and I don't think we should view these changes as something to be worried about and to shy away from and run away from. We need to embrace them. But we can embrace them positively, and we can look at that. And this is where TAs, I think, are extremely important, is that we look at those changes and saying, right, how do we reframe them in order to be a positive impact on the business and also to those employees that we want to onboard, we want to seek. So I think that's the reframing for businesses and individuals. I mean, obviously individuals look at this and think, fantastic, I get day one right, I get this protection, I get that protection. But you don't want people to come into your business already, I want to sue. What you want to do, and I think both Joanna and Martyn have touched upon it, is you want to look at it in terms of actually making sure it's right for the business, firstly. And yes, it is going to have some sort of impact. We don't have perfect people out there. But I think it's making sure that the TAs have enough in their toolbox to make sure they've got the right tools to actually go out and see the right individual that will fit into the business. But in terms of going back to what you were saying, so I've sort of veered off from it, I think the risks are mainly, if you're outsourcing, minimal. It depends on the framing of the contract and the jurisdiction in which you put that contract.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. So you make a great point about offshoring there, but you can outsource the employment relationship to organisations to temporary workforce and contingent workforces. So that's where I was thinking, if that was a choice of an organisation, do some of these elements, certainly with regards to harassment, do they then apply to the employer, or do they apply to the provider that's providing to you? Probably getting a bit complex and a bit meaty here.
Yeah, I
It's
think I confused it actually with
no, that's fine.
sorry, outsourcing
Outsourcing and
if you're
offshoring, but there's two
yeah,
great
so if
points.
we forget offshoring for a minute, if we're outsourcing the work,
Hmm.
you, the employer, is still responsible.
Right.
Absolutely. Yeah, because you've got to look at the contract. It comes down to the contract. Who's the contract with? Who's the employer? Who's actually looking after? Who's got the duty of care to the employee? So even if you are, for example, seconding somebody for 6 months over to another part of the business, you will remain their employer, but also that seconded company will also have responsibilities towards the individual. So it actually comes down to the contract there and
Yeah.
how the employer who's resourcing someone else, how they're actually framing that contract. But I
Yeah.
don't think in some areas you are going to be able to obligate your duty of care to another organisation.
No, I can see,
Yeah.
Joanna, you're nodding furiously there. So, what are your thoughts around that?
Yes, I completely agree with what Nighat just said. I think outsourcing, if they're still remaining in the UK, fundamentally doesn't change it. As an example, if you had contractors that are running through, say, an MSP model, where they're working, who's directing their work, and who's actually managing the day to day, whose laptop they sit on, that fundamentally defines who their working relationship is with. So fundamentally, all of those liabilities still sit with with the company who is getting employee to work for them, not who fundamentally payrolls them. So actually, it doesn't lift any of those rights. The only
Yeah.
situation in which some of those rights are absolved is sort of Nigat's first point around offshoring. I think from speaking to a lot of my peers in the wider industry, a lot of them are talking about potential RPOs and models like that, and those RPOs often have offshore delivery centres and they have them in locations that are more straightforward in terms of legislation. They're also more straightforward in terms of costs. So actually increasing taxation, increasing liabilities, increasing all of those things for employers, yes, I completely see the benefits of it for a lot of employees. However, making it a less attractive place for the business to operate in the UK makes potentially the job market a lot tighter, and less attractive for employers to employ people in this country. Obviously, there are some jobs like joiners need to get a door frame fixed. You can't do that remotely. They have to come and do it on site here. But there are a lot of, as we've seen with COVID, so many things can be done virtually. They can be done remotely. They can be done from elsewhere. So pushing businesses into a situation where they're forced to, for technology, that person doesn't necessarily need to sit here to be building various things your business might need. So why would businesses keep those people and those roles here, especially on contract basis, where they're not sure how long the project will last? They've planned it to a point, but they don't know what comes next. And this legislation, it has positives. I'm not saying it doesn't, but it has some unintended negatives that could push our job market into a tighter place than it already is in, and
Yeah.
push businesses to look elsewhere.
And I suppose one of the unintended consequences is this making you and Martyn and everyone on this call to think about, how do I frame that within the organization? Because it's my job, right?
Mhm.
Gatekeeper, we're responsible not just for bringing people in, we're responsible for the strategy and advising the organization on the strategy. So is that something that you are looking into? Is that something that you might be exploring to help support and future-proof the organization by saying that as a consequence of things that are changing, we need to have this conversation now about our workforce and how we structure it. I'm intrigued to know because we've got a little bit of time, but yeah, as you know, all of a sudden it's going to be Christmas again, and we're going to look back and say, where's that come from? So are these the kind of things that are going through your mind, and you're starting to frame these conversations?
It's certainly considerations, but it's looking at the workforce planning, looking at the target operating models, but it's also looking at how do we upskill our business. It's not just TA, it's those hiring managers, it's the HR teams, it's absolutely every person in the organization. And with a lot of organizations being quite lean, where do you find the time to do those things on top of your business as usual work, to do all of that upskilling, to educate people in the business, to make sure they're taking regular notes, monitoring their new starters, they're looking at things. It's finding that time. So it's a real balance, and it's not a straightforward answer around target operating models. It's also around that upskilling and but also finding the time to do that, because how do you do that in lean teams where business is already being squeezed in a lot of ways?
Yeah, no, and look, note taking. You said note taking. There was a great question that came in previous to the start about how can AI support this. Now, the conversation naturally went there to AI, like every conversation we have always goes to AI. But what can AI do to support TA and to support the business with regards to getting things right here? And I was racking my brains beforehand thinking, okay, that's a great question, but you said it, accurate note taking. There is automatically an opportunity there with regards to transcripting, and they're getting better and better now. So I'm going to put you on the spot, and I'll switch it away quickly if we need to. But any thoughts around AI and what that can do to support us as TA and TA leaders to navigate this and build compliance into what's around the corner? And you're looking
I think
forward
it's
to that, Martyn. I'm coming straight
yeah,
to you.
sorry. I think it's not just about AI. AI is going to impact everything. We all know that. Hopefully positively and hopefully in the right way. But it's also about taking that a step further in terms of having the right cadences, having the right follow-ups. And Joanna made a very good point. How do you do that if you've got less people? How do you do that if you've got less resources? So there will be leaning into AI. There will be leaning into systems and processes that can be set up, that can be automated. I'm not talking about actually speaking to the employees or speaking to the employer. I'm talking about how to structure the process itself, which AI can assist with, there are systems that you can get to help you with. And obviously, note taking, being able to we were talking about this yesterday. Note taking is a great tool, but it still needs to be checked if you put it through AI. That how things come through can be different. And we all know AI sometimes, even Google searches, you're looking for something, it turns out something completely different. So there needs to be that check, not just a tick box exercise. So there needs to be that verification, by a human, not just AI. But AI can absolutely assist the process, of course.
Martyn, that is a great point. And Nighat, I'd have to turn to you. And AI transcripting, defensible in a court of law, in an employment tribunal. What's that situation?
Well, at the moment, AI is causing havoc in the legal world, where we've got barristers and solicitors, and this is reported cases of using AI, and then what's the word they use? Not imagines. I forgot what the actual word is. Hallucinations.
Hallucinates.
It hallucinates. And we've had some fantastic, I shouldn't say this about my profession, but we've had a couple of cases where barristers and solicitors have used AI, it's hallucinated, created cases that do not exist, and they've gone before judges, and consequences, they've been struck off. So at the moment, I'm not a huge fan of AI, but it is a useful tool in terms of recording and getting that information where, as we all know, you're interviewing somebody, you're dotting away. I always say to my employers, clients, that make sure when you're actually interviewing somebody, take really detailed notes, because one of the things that comes out of these interviews is that if there's someone who's, we have had it unfortunately with one of my clients consistently, that they go into these interviews with the whole idea that I know I'm not going to get the job, but I'm going to sue them later. And even getting £1,000, £2,000, where an employer doesn't want to go to tribunal because the costs, it's inefficient. For that individual, that's a good bit of money you're earning, and you do get individuals who do that. So where you've got AI note taking, that's not going to miss a trick. It's going to record most things as long as you've got a good AI tool. So I am an advocate at that element of actually using AI for interviewing purposes. Absolutely.
I'm hearing here, invest in TA, invest in TA. I'm a broken record. Yeah, I'm always searching for the things that can safeguard, protect, improve the visibility of our profession. That's why I've seized on this one, and will continue to do so. Because if we're looking at that risk in the organization, and the way to mitigate that risk is to have better capability, better competence, better processes, etc., then and we're looking at the potential risk of AI, then this is down to people and invested in people. So again, I think we have a huge opportunity here. Martyn, Joanna, any thoughts on that? Are you coming away from this call and hopefully others on the call thinking there's a conversation I need to be having that I need to frame with my leadership, that I need a little bit more consideration, a little bit more budget, a little bit more support? What are your thoughts?
I think for us, we're in the process of defining what good looks like for our TA team. We've built it up quite significantly. Actually, I'm in quite a fortunate position where our team has grown. We've had a lot of investment, and our business does view it as incredibly key to our business because fundamentally we're a people business that works for people, ensures businesses and people are at the absolute forefront of organizations. So TA is seen as a very key strategic function. So I'm in a very lucky position in that sense. But AI and making sure we're getting the right people in, what I mentioned around um, AI agents tailoring CVs and people having scripts on their second screen when they're interviewing. We're figuring out how to tackle that, how to tackle
Yeah.
effectively cheating in interviews, and how do we make sure that for our business, do we bring those kind we try to always do at least one stage as face to face to make
Mhm.
sure that we can try and protect against that. But I wouldn't say we have everything 100% fixed and sorted because I don't think anyone has. Things
Yeah.
are changing far too quickly to have a solution. But for us, I'm in a lucky position in that our business does view TA as a really core strategic part of the organization.
Fantastic. Let's hope everyone out there can say the same thing. Martyn, have you written the business case to the bosses yet to double the size of the team?
No, you're not going to get anyone on this panel disagreeing with you that TA should have more budget, and probably anyone watching. But I think joking aside, it is a valid point, and but also where and how clean the handoff of an employee or an interviewee coming to an employee and going through that probationary period. How clean is that handoff if there is a handoff? Now, I've worked in organizations where TA owns the bringing in of that individual and the onboarding to obviously the hiring managers really own it, but the process and how things sit behind it is owned by TA. You need resources to do that.
Yeah.
And I think there is an element that comes out of this that should be obviously as seamless as possible. But if you have TA, if you have the experts guiding the candidate through and then helping the hiring managers, it's one going to improve, I argue, their role. It's going to make it more interesting. The value to the organization is better because you get, retain, and onboard better people. And looking at the flip side, you manage the people that, for whatever reason, haven't worked out. Hopefully not Joanna's case, but where you've brought somebody on and they're not as good as they were in the interview. So
Yeah.
I think there's an element of working out where that handoff goes. But yeah, absolutely, we should triple the
Excellent.
budget of every TA function.
Well, you
Yeah.
heard it here first, and a unique proposition. I'm looking at the clock, and it's run down so quickly, and that's just due to the richness of the conversation. So I thank you. We did fire in one of the questions that came in. No one has put their hand up yet from the audience or fired any other questions in, but now is the time. If you've got one last question, anyone wants to come off mute and shout out, go for it. And I'll pause for a few seconds to see if that comes in. Everyone's shy. We've done a brilliant job, everyone. And I just want your passing thoughts on within the last minute, starting with you, Nighat, on sum this up for us, this conversation. What are the key things to take away?
I think for talent acquisition leaders, the challenge is to move from reactive compliance to proactive ownership, embedding legal awareness. So your lawyer should be your friend and into every stage of the hiring journey. So
Amazing.
good luck, guys.
Thank you so much. Joanna.
I would very much agree with that. For us, it's about reducing risk, focusing on compliance, supporting candidates and hiring managers in making those right decisions and doing the right things for the candidates, for the new people joining our business, but also doing the right thing for the business in finding ways around some of the new AI things and challenges it's posing us at the moment.
Incredible. Thank you. Martyn, take us home.
Absolutely. So during my research for this, AI helped me. So there was a point that comes from a government publication. Now, obviously the government are putting this in, so there is a however you define this word, spin on it. But there is a government commission analysis suggesting the act can have net positive effects on employment productivity if risks, which you both mentioned, are managed and implementation is proportionate. So the risk is not the direction of travel, but it's where you get the misalignment between legal design and operational reality that the problems are going to come in. So it's taking that, now seriously, looking at the legal implications and adapting that to the operational reality.
Fantastic. Brilliant. So look, I just need to thank every single one of you, Nighat, Joanna, Martyn, everyone that's joined us. I hope you got a huge value from that. Everyone behind the scenes who has been working away building this this webinar. We're going to be doing these monthly. We're going to bring some real topical conversations. If you feel that you in the audience there have got something that you want to share and you want to debate with some other leaders, please get in touch with me. But I just want to say a heartfelt thank you to everyone and your contributions. It's been brilliant. This is recorded. This is going to be shared. This is going to be available for other people to watch. And I think the key message here is rise. TA leaders have an opportunity here to spearhead this conversation, own this, and mitigate against those risks. So thank you ever so much for joining us, everyone. We'll see you again next month. Thank you.